So, we're ever so lucky to have with us here today Brian Blum, author of Totaled, the billion-dollar crash of the startup that took on big auto, big oil, and the world. It tells the fascinating story of Better Place, the electric car startup which sought to change the way we think about electric vehicles by combating so-called range anxiety with its system of battery switching stations. Brian, first of all, could you tell us just a little bit about Better Place and perhaps what drew you personally to write the book?
Sure. So I live in Jerusalem, Israel, and Better Place was founded in the Tel Aviv area in Israel. It eventually expanded to other countries, but the base of operations were here, so we were very aware of it. And what Better Place intended to do was to create a way for, as you said, for people driving electric cars not to deal or have to worry about range anxiety, not having to worry that their vehicle would get 150 kilometers, 200 kilometers, 400 kilometers, and then run out of electricity, and they'd be stuck, and there'd be no way to fill it up like you would with a gas station. Now, Better Place started Better Place started in 2007. So we're talking now 13, 14 years ago, which is a while. So in 2007, Tesla was the runner-up. Better Place was really the preeminent electric car company of the time. Nobody else was even close to what they were doing in terms of making an affordable mass market vehicle. But the cars at the time, the electric cars at the time, the batteries at the time, really couldn't go more than about 120 to 140 kilometers. Now today, of course, Tesla and the GM cars and the Volvos and all the other, pure electric cars can easily get 300 to 400 kilometers on a charge, but not in 2007. And it didn't look like the technology would ever enable us to get there anytime soon. So Better Place's idea was, what if instead of having to stop and recharge the battery, which would, of course, if you got to a charge spot, would still take you 30 to 40 minutes, and nobody wants that. What if you pulled into what looked like a gas station or a car wash? Your car went in. You can actually see it in the background here. For those of you who are watching on video, there's an electric car in a Better Place station. It would actually go into the station. The car would get lifted up on a hydraulic system. A robot would come out of the station, open up the bottom of the car. The battery would plop out onto a plank. It would go into the station. Out would come a freshly charged battery with 100% charge. Go back into the car. They would screw back the bolts, and off you would go. And all that would take 5 minutes, and then you could go on your way for the next 150 kilometers or so. And by the time Better Place rolled out in Israel and then later in Denmark, it worked. And you asked me what was my interest or how did I get involved? Well, I bought a Better Place car. My family and I bought one of the cars, and I can tell you it really did allow us to get from our home in Jerusalem to anywhere in Israel without running out of juice.
So you talk a little bit then about that infrastructure problem, the costs rising, that scaling up. That's always a challenge for any company. In this case, particularly, so much depended on all of those things happening at just the right time. What are your thoughts on that specifically?
So Better Place raised nearly $1 billion. It was actually only 850 million, but it sounds better, $1 billion. Yeah. and that's a lot of money to raise before you have essentially launched the company. Most companies, software companies certainly, and the CEO of Better Place came out of the software business. And so in software, it's very easy to roll out a version 1 or a beta version or an alpha version. You try it with some users, you see what they think, you iterate, you improve on it. And eventually by the time you're raising money along the way on different tranches, and eventually, you launch a product. And you haven't raised so much money, but Better Place raised, 750 million of the total 850, before it really had even launched. Right. They hadn't even put any cars on the streets at all. So that that made it very difficult for the company to raise any more money. The way that the investments were structured is that to bring in more money from the existing investors, you had to bring on new investors. And actually, when Better Place declared bankruptcy in, well, actually, just about 7 years ago from where we are now, speaking in May 2020, it declared bankruptcy in May 2013. The way that the investments were structured is they needed to bring in more investors. But after $850 million of investment, there was nobody really else to bring in. And the company was not structured in such a way as to be appealing to venture capitalists. It really only appealed to more institutional investors, hedge funds and banks, and they didn't want to take the risk. So I guess the answer to your question is, it raised so much money so soon before it launched that when it really needed it, there was no way to bring more money into the company.
There was no one left. Was there, in your opinion, would it have been possible for them to have started smaller than they did? Obviously, they were doing something entirely new that required a huge amount of infrastructure to facilitate it.
Right. So this is a classic chicken versus the egg question, and it's asked. People at Better Place asked it, and people that I spoke to, when I wrote the book, asked the question. What if they had developed a small pilot that went, say, from Tel Aviv to one of the suburbs, where people were doing most of the commuting. Maybe they could have done a pilot there, raised $50 million instead of 850, and proved the concept. And in fact, some of the people that worked at Better Place, told me that was what the company really planned originally, and never planned to raise so much money that it would have and should have gone that way. Now, why is it a chicken or egg problem? Because if you're just proving the concept locally, could they have raised any money at all? And it's not clear. One of the reasons it became so exciting and got an auto manufacturer on board, Renault, and got interest of other auto manufacturers, although none came on during the period when Better Place was operating, was because there was so much buzz. It was written about in so many different publications. Shai Agassi, the CEO, gave a TED talk that was seen by 1 million people. It was a very exciting company. They had this amazing demonstration center, where I'm trying to remember, it was tens or hundreds of thousands of people would come in. Some of them were consumers who wanted to buy the car. Some were school kids. Some were politicians. But many people, including us, went into this demonstration center. All that built up an image that helped the company. If they were just doing a small demo, it might not have succeeded. There's one other possibility that they could have done that would have been smaller, and that would have been, say, to do it in a small part of China. Now, why do I mention China? Because Better Place expanded to many countries. They had operations all over Europe, in Australia, as well as Scandinavia, where they actually operated a network of swapping stations. But they had an operation in China as well, an entire switchable demo station there. And the Chinese were very interested. And the Chinese today remain among the most interested in the original battery swap model. What if Better Place had started there with a small demo in China? Could have happened, but it didn't.
Fascinating. Right, so this is perhaps the trickiest question, Brian. If you could go back in time, and if Agassi were to listen to you, is there any advice that you would give to him if you could just have a word in his ear when he was starting out on the project?
Right. So first of all, I would not give Shai Agassi any advice.
Fair enough.
Well, no, I'll tell you why. He's far smarter than I am. He is one of the smartest people that is ever going to be in any room. I mean, he rose very fast, raised a lot of money. He could do calculations and recite numbers and have everything in his head. He wouldn't listen to me, and I wouldn't want to be so presumptuous as to give him advice. But if I were speaking to somebody else about the lessons to be learned from Better Place afterwards, I would say there are four things to keep in mind. One is that startups must remain nimble, and Better Place grew so fast. I mean, they had over 1,000 people on staff. They had all that money. They had all those offices. They were more like, you know, an IBM or a Microsoft, you know, before they even had a product. So they weren't nimble. They also were very, very focused on their solution, the solution of the battery swap stations, and they weren't open to other possibilities. So I would say you need to remain open to other solutions. For example, what about being the infrastructure provider for the General Motors Chevy Volt, which is actually something that was proposed at one point that Better Place turned down. Third, I'd say, you know, you need to know when to focus. So at the same time as you need to be open to the possibilities, you also need to say, you know what, if these guys are coming from Bahrain and they want us to build, to talk about building swapping station infrastructure in the Gulf, well, maybe we should be focused on Israel or on Denmark or on a smaller territory. So you got to remain open to ideas, but focus on particular geographies. And finally, I would say you have to really know how to manage changing assumptions. And that is kind of the bottom line behind the entire Better Place, fall, which is that the assumptions behind the company changed. At first, it was going to cost a certain amount for the car, but the price went up. The cost of the stations went up. The interest in consumers in the particular brand, Renault, was not where they thought. Better Place was expecting that fleets, the corporate cars that companies, rent for their employees would be very interested, but they weren't. And there's a whole bunch more assumptions that were written into the business plan that changed, and Better Place didn't or wasn't able to change along with it. And so that's kind of part of being nimble, but it's also a mindset of being able to change when the assumptions behind your company change.
Sure. I mean, it sounds those are problems that that all companies encounter at some point, aren't they? Particularly that flexibility of the business model. That it's the importance of pivoting. It's integral. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Brian. I think that's given us some really fascinating insights into the case. And obviously we can get a lot more from your book, Totaled, which is available on Amazon and various other places online at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah. Amazon, Barnes and Noble's, Book Depository, it's all there.
Brilliant. All right. I think we'll end there, Brian. I'll stop recording. Okay.
Thank you, Emily.